Mr. Carter?
Thank you, Chair. It's Mark Shorman, District Manager with the Ministry of Natural Resources. I'll introduce, but first of all, thank you, Chair and panel, for welcoming us today, and thank you, guests. I'll start off with a very brief overview. The background and scope, reason why we're here today, is on June 18th, 2013, the Joint Review Panel requested that the M&R, Ministry of Natural Resources, provide a submission on the effects of the project on the use of provincial parks, as well as any comments regarding hydrogeology, superficial geology, and the potential presence of hydrocarbon or other mineral resources at or near the DGR project site. So we don't have expertise on superficial geology of the site, but we will address other topics. So the guests I have with me today, Chair and panel, are myself. I'm the District Manager of the Ministry of Natural Resources out of Midhurst District. To my right, I have Terry Carter, Chief Geologist, Petroleum Operations. And to my left, I have Tim Marchand that will speak on provincial parks and protected areas, and he's the Senior Parks Planner out of our London office. I'll start off with a few pages, Chair. General introduction on the District Office role and involvement in the review of the environmental impact statements for the project. So the scope of our role, it's within the Ministry of Natural Resources Midhurst District Office. The project is we're located in Midhurst, which is just north of Barrie, with an office in Owen Sound. Within the context of our review, we reviewed the following considerations. We okay?
May we have some assistance in the back? Yes. Can we please have some assistance for the lady? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Sherman?
Thank you. When we consider the project, we consider it in the context with our role for major projects within the district. One consideration is the fact that the project is located entirely within the boundaries of OPG owned and operated lands. And from our perspective, this site, from a site characteristic perspective, is considered to be disturbed in a developed site, characterized by intense industrial development, superficial buildings, internal road systems, and facilities associated with the production of nuclear hydro. So from the district office review, we're looking at terrestrial components of the site. In our review, we also reviewed was undertaken to ensure compliance with our legislative mandate, including potential for conflict with aggregate resources, endangered species, fish and wildlife, forest management, oil, salt and gas, and crown land management legislation. From a district office perspective, we've worked with OPG on this specific project since 2007 during the pre-consultation stage. It included review of relevant background resource inventory material and the provision from a district perspective of or sharing of information related to resource information, specifically species and natural heritage material and information. We reviewed a further environmental impact study in 2011, which informed the Canadian Environmental Assessment submission. Our role in environmental assessments across the district, provincial and federal environment assessments, is to provide technical comments, and the district is not an approval authority under the Canadian Environmental Assessment. And in review of the project EIS, early review sort of indicated that the project would not conflict with any authorities, approvals, or legislation that we deliver out of the Ministry of Natural Resources Office. Our review, in summary, we reviewed an environmental impact statement in 2011. Our primary concerns very often were related to species at risk, including survey methodology for species at risk and the application of appropriate mitigation measures. And once again, during these reviews, we confirm that the project does not conflict with legislated authorities of MNR.
Mr. Sherman, perhaps you want to advance your slide?
Thank you. Throughout the process, another critical piece to our information sharing was the sharing that it provided the opportunity to share with Environment Canada as a lead, and once again, that included natural resource inventories, natural heritage values, and also comments for survey methodology and mitigation measures. In conclusion, MNR is satisfied that its technical comments and concerns have been addressed by Environment Canada, and appropriate recommendations have been provided to the DGR panel. Next steps from a district perspective. We're also satisfied that Environment Canada's recommendations includes MNR's technical comments and further working relationship with both OPS, Environment Canada, and through the project. At this point in time, Chair, I will turn it over to Terry Carter, Chief Geologist with Petroleum Operations Section in London. Go ahead, Terry.
Thank you. For the records, Terry Carter, Chief Geologist, Petroleum Operations for the Ministry of Natural Resources, and I'm based in London. The scope of the Ministry's responsibilities as summarized on this slide as the Oil, Gas, and Salt Resources Act, Section 26302 of the Mining Act. We're the lead ministry responsible for resource management and regulation of Ontario's upstream oil and gas resource industries, storage of hydrocarbons and geological formations, mining of salt by the solution mining method, and disposition of oil, gas, and hydrocarbon storage rights on Crown lands. We license and inspect wells that are drilled for these purposes, and we collect and manage information collected from the drilling and operation of these wells and associated works. And the information and data from these licenses and inspections is stored at a public facility known as the Oil, Gas, and Salt Resources Library, which is in London. In addition to that, our staff geologists, myself, we have geological expertise and knowledge as relevant to the application. Our library is a resource center for the study of the subsurface geology and the resources contained within it. It's a public facility. Contained in the facility are drill core from over 1,000 wells, drill cuttings from 13,000 wells, well records for nearly 27,000 wells. There are geophysical logs. There's it's a technical piece of information. There are other digital data sets. So this data set supports our work, and as a regulator is also a critical source of information for the industry when they're doing research on drilling new wells and reducing the risk of exploration. And it turns out it's a source of geological information that's relevant for this application and for any other application for a subsurface use in the bedrock of Southern Ontario. In regards to the geology, the hydrogeology and hydrocarbon potential on the site, the subsurface bedrock geology of Southern Ontario has been well documented in publications by the Ontario Geological Survey. Oil, gas, and water, its occurrence is well known in the subsurface based on the information that we collect at our library. And I summarize that information. Actually, the next slide will do a better job at that. There's 3 domains of water that we know from our own mapping, and in parallel with the work done by NWMO and consistent with their work. There's a shallow domain of fresh water from a few meters to a maximum of 250 meters depth, an intermediate zone of saline sulfur water to a maximum depth of 500 meters, There's a deep zone of very highly saline formation water. I think I'll go to the next slide at this point. This summarizes very similar, it's a similar type of diagram to the geosphere model that MWMO presented. So this would be a geosphere or a geology and hydrogeological model. What it is a scaled geological cross-section of southern Ontario showing the layered sedimentary bedrock types, which geologists refer to as formations, and known occurrence of oil, natural gas, and water in those rocks. Just point out to you there's a 125 times vertical exaggeration, so the dip of these rocks is highly exaggerated. They actually dip at 3 to 6 meters per kilometer, so almost flat, but not quite. The bedrock layers shown on here have consistent lithology, fairly consistent thicknesses. There are facies variations, lateral facies variations in some of these formations more than others. They're deposited in geological environments that lend themselves to these formations being consistent over long lateral distances. The rock colored brown on here is shale. It's a couple of reasons why it's shown on there. It gives some definition to the section, has practical value. The shales are barriers to fluid movement. So as practical value from the consideration of where oil and gas occur and where water occur in these rocks. Most of the rocks shown on here would be aquitards, i.e. they retard the movement of water. They also retard the movement of hydrocarbons. The exceptions are shown on here in blue and with the code FRE, which means freshwater. SUL is the saline sulfur water zone. SAL is highly saline formation waters. Again, this zoning is consistent with the shallow, intermediate, deep terminology used by OPG and NWMO. So what the data available to us shows, there's a shallow zone of fresh water, and it's an active topography-driven flow zone. And that's shown in blue, and the arrows are meant to show inferred flow directions. And the data available to us shows that extends a maximum of 250 meters below the surface. At the intermediate depths, down to about 500 meters, most of the water it's saline, 1 to 10,000 parts per million, up to 30,000 parts per million is the usual salinity. And it often has hydrogen sulfide present in that. So when we say sulfur water, we mean water with dissolved hydrogen sulfide. And in the very deepest parts of this diagram is where the saline formation waters occur. And these waters, with the data available to us, because we are collecting geochemical analyses from waters from newly drilled oil and gas wells, from production sites from oil and gas wells, from springs and quarries. So we have our own set of geochemical data. And so these deep waters have salinities exceeding 100,000 parts per million total dissolved solids. The regional aquifers, if you're familiar with these bedrock formations, are in the Dundee Lucas, the Bass Islands Wablo, the Guelph, and to a certain extent the Gasport, and the Cambrian. In the Coburg formation, which is proposed for the DGR, the data that we have, again, from all the records available to us, is there is no water in these formations unless there's a hydrothermal dolomite reservoir, which has been talked about previously. And this figure just gives an illustration of one of the models, and there are different models for what these look like. But basically, the rocks must have been faulted there has to have been fluid flow in a geologic past along that fault that altered the limestone adjacent to that fault into dolomite, as it's added magnesium, substituted for the calcium in the carbonate structure. That creates some porosity at the same time. A vertical seal, so this is in the geologic past, and these are linear because they're associated with faults. And then these are sealed by shales that are deposited on top of the faults, and the porous zones do not pass through the overlying shales. These can have some lateral extent. As you can see, the figure that's shown here is showing Essex County. You can see the city of Windsor on there. And you can see these are kilometers in length. They'd be, on average, about 500 meters in width. So that's the type of feature that you, for the purpose of the repository in these rocks, if one of these doesn't occur there, then there's no water in these rocks, and there's no movement of water through these rocks. I've just got a few slides with data shown on to support what I'm saying about no water occurring in these rocks. It isn't an opinion, it's an observation from our well records. This slide represents the Trenton group, which includes the Coburg Formation. And we have 2,049 wells in our database that penetrate the Trenton group. 247 of those have water records recorded by the drillers. That's reported to us and retained in our records. Most of those reports are freshwater within 250 meters of the surface. And that's a general occurrence in all formations in southern Ontario. There's freshwater within a few meters of the surface where these formations are the first bedrock in the subsurface. What's of most interest is the water below 250 meters, and we have, let me move ahead here. 185 of those records are of water, of saline water, below 250 meters, but with 3 or 4 exceptions, all of these occurrences of water are within hydrothermal dolomite zones. So, in summary, there's essentially no water being encountered in deep drill holes in the Trenton group. Or, to be more correct, being reported to us in drill records. We see the same thing. This next slide shows the Georgian Bay and the Blue Mountain, data from the Georgian Bay and Blue Mountain formations. And a similar result, 2,109 wells, 74 water records, only 13 are in bedrock below 250 meters. So again, the same observation, no water is being reported in these formations. So these are the overlying shale formations. The next slide, again, the same thing, the Queenston Formation, which is the next highest shale formation. This time we have 11,000 records to draw on. Only 97 of those have water records. Only 9 are in bedrock below 250 meters. So again, that's the factual basis for the information presented on the model. I'll move on to oil and gas potential. This first slide is for discovered resources where we know oil and gas occurs in the vicinity of the site. And on the slide I'm showing you here is a 50-kilometer radius circle drawn around the DGR. There are 2 past producing and 1 actively producing gas pool within that 50-kilometer circle. The Hepworth pool, which is the one to the north, it's no longer active, produced gas from the Black River group of rocks, which are below the Coburg Formation. The Dungannon and Ashfield 5 and 9 WD pools produced gas from the Guelph Formation, which is above the Coburg Formation. Within that circle, there's a total of 64 exploratory wells. Only 2 since 1991, no discoveries since 1979. So those are the facts about oil and gas in the vicinity of the site. In regards to potential, On the site with the drilling, I've reviewed the information collected by NWMO and OPG. They have not identified a commercial hydrocarbon accumulation in their work on the site. There's no geochemical evidence of proximity to one. But we note that there's one remaining undrilled seismic anomaly from their 2D seismic surveys. There are minor shows of crude oil in the drill core, which indicates crude oil has been generated in these rocks or migrated into them. Oil and gas shows are not unusual in petroleum wells drilled in southern Ontario, or water wells for that part. You can have oil and gas shows. So that's not an indication directly of commercial hydrocarbons, but it does tell us that those rocks generated oil and natural gas in the geologic past, and if there was a trap of sufficient size in the rocks, then there could be an accumulation of commercial size, but not on the site, at least not with the data available to us now. And we also have to note there's no current industry interest in this area. No one is drilling any wells in this area. The 8 diamond drill holes, at least there were 8 diamond drill holes drilled by OPG at the DGR site that were licensed with the Ministry of Natural Resources on the Oil, Gas and Salt Resources Act. These were subject to inspection by our compliance staff, and there were no issues or infractions with those activities. Drilling and completion records are available for public viewing at our library. The drill core was acquired under these licensed wells, is stored at the DGR site until commencement of operation of the repository, and is accessible for public study, and this is by agreement with the Ministry of Natural Resources. Our provincial standards require that the 8 drill core be delivered to our library when the DGR becomes operational. Our concern here is our library does not have sufficient capacity to house these core. This is an unprecedented volume of core compared to what our facility was designed to house, and there would be no room for any core from any other wells drilled in the future if we took this core. In fact, we can't take the core, we can't accommodate even this core. These are very important core. They're the best quality and most studied cores of Paleozoic bedrock ever collected in Ontario. And it's in our opinion that these should be kept and retained for their future value, and in the event that the DGR is approved in their value in the ongoing operations of the DGR. Thank you very much.
Chair, I'll turn for the final part of our presentation.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the panel. Thank you very much for the opportunity. For the record, my name is Tim Marchand. I'm the Acting Senior Park Planner for Ontario Parks, Ministry of Natural Resources. Our office is also based out of London, Ontario. So in terms of my presentation, just to provide a little bit of geographic context, this slide on the presentation highlights the location of Huron Provincial Park, immediately south of the Bruce nuclear property. In terms of a local setting for the park, you'll see on this slide current development within the park, which includes 2 campgrounds. We have a number of comfort stations, which are washrooms, maintenance facilities in support of the operation, in addition to administration offices. A bit of background on the park. Development of the provincial park began in 1956, and the park was opened in 1959. The site, the lands that represent the park, were regulated under the Provincial Parks Act in 1967. Side note on that, we now have a new Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act. So all new sites are regulated under that act, and these regulations are, I guess, grandfathered under our act. The park property was acquired by the then Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario in 1973 for the purposes of Bruce Nuclear Facility. And at that same time, a lease agreement was signed, a 999-year lease endorsed to allow M&R to operate the provincial park lands as a day-use-only provincial park. And due to that, the campground was then phased out by 1976. By 1998, the lease was amended with the shutdown of the last Bruce nuclear heavy water plants. And the amendment included for, or allowed for, expanded public access to the park area, extended hours of operation, an extended operating season, and reintroduction of overnight camping. In 2000, the Inver-Huron Provincial Park Management Plan was approved as the official policy for the long-term management and development of the park. The plan reflects Ontario Parks' intent to protect the natural and cultural heritage features of the park in accordance with our Act, and to maintain and develop high-quality opportunities for outdoor recreation and heritage appreciation. And the following bullets are a summary of those values. The park protects provincially significant special and representative prehistoric and historical resources, a variety of ecological communities including mixed forest, wetlands, open fields, and the Lake Huron shoreline. And there are over 265 plant species within the park, including some species at risk, and over 200 species of birds and a variety of mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. From a recreation perspective, the park does offer car camping, swimming, sunbathing, fishing, hiking, cycling, boating, canoeing, and wildlife viewing opportunities. In terms of camping, by 2005, Ontario Parks had reconstructed 162 campsites on the former footprint of the campsites that were present prior to sale, and they were redeveloped along with supporting infrastructure. By 2012, the park received a total of 55,576 visitors, and in turn provided the public with 49,889 camping opportunities. In order to meet current demand and with future demand that's anticipated, Ontario Parks is currently working towards developing an additional 78 campsites on the former campground area of the park. That development will also include group camping and supporting infrastructure as well. So with respect to potential effects, in reviewing DGR project documentation, it was highlighted that residual negative effects related to noise and air quality will exist during all phases of the project. Ontario Parks has expressed concern that these effects may impact park user experience in addition to individual species, potentially within the park, notably breeding, nesting, or staging birds. As Mr. Shorman's highlighted, Environment Canada has been involved with review of the DGR materials, and at this point, in terms of impacts to bird species, it's felt that it'll be temporary, and Ontario Parks is fine with that position at this time. So we've also made contact with OPG to request additional information on potential effects related to noise, air quality, and vibration. And in response, the following slide highlights response from OPG, that noise levels at the monitoring locations, one of which is within the park, are not expected to be adverse, i.e. not greater than 3 decibels increase. Health Canada indicators have indicated that there's no effects on human health as a result of noise. Animals may have a lower sensitivity than humans to low frequency noises associated with the project. However, available literature and photographic evidence on site indicates that wildlife can and will readily habituate and adapt to types of noises that will be generated by the project. And noticeable effects from vibrations during site preparation and construction phase are not expected to extend beyond the Bruce nuclear site. and no effects are anticipated on reptile species. With respect to next steps, based upon the information provided by OPG to Ontario Parks, Ontario Parks does not have any additional questions at this time related to adverse noise or vibration effects. We have requested that additional information concerning the nature and extent of potential air quality impacts in the vicinity of the park be provided, and those have been provided by OPG. And at this point, Ontario Parks has no further concerns related to air quality. Within the project documentation, there was a number of monitoring efforts outlined to determine levels of effects and effectiveness of proposed mitigation. And with that, Ontario Park strongly supports that. Seeing as though there's a number of sites, at least 2 within the park itself, that contribute to those monitoring efforts. So we intend to continue to be involved in that process of review, along with the Midhurst District of MNR and with Environment Canada. And with that, that is the conclusion of MNR's slideshow to the panel. Thank you.